Hi, everyone, and welcome to the final webinar in the 2020 Advocacy in Action series. We're so happy to have you here. We've appreciated everyone who's joined us over the past year for all of our webinars on oxygen, our webinars on how to participate in Pulmonary Fibrosis Awareness Month. And we're really excited for today's webinar. We have Bill Schmidt, who is the CEO and president of the PFF. And we have Erik Fatemi, who is a principal at Cornerstone Government Affairs, presenting today. We had a lot that happened in 2020 that you're going to hear about, and we're going to have a lot that's happening in 2021. But none of this is possible without you all. If you weren't there reaching out to your members of Congress and providing support for these different policies, we wouldn't be able to make any of this happen. So we're glad that you're here, and we hope that you're able to learn a lot today from the presentations. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The slides will be available as a handout for download. It should be available in your webinar screen. They'll also be available after the presentation for download. You can submit questions in the questions section. We'll have time for questions at the end. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and submit those in the question function. And at the end of this webinar, there's going to be a survey asking you about the webinar, sort of your experience with the webinar, what you thought. Please send that feedback. It really helps us to know what kind of webinars we should be creating in the future and that kind of information. So I'm really pleased to go ahead and introduce Bill Schmidt. As I said, he is the president and CEO of the PFF. He's been here since 2017. Before joining the PFF, he was at the Foundation Fighting Blindness for 12 years. And Bill has really extensive experience in government relations. I know that I've learned a lot from working with him over the past few years because he has that experience, working with people on the Hill and trying to get policies and legislation in place. So we're really lucky to have him. And I will go ahead and turn it over to him. We are going to turn off our cameras for the presentation, but we'll come back on. You'll be able to see us at the end when we're doing questions. So please go ahead, Bill.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kate. Really appreciate it. And I really want to thank everybody for participating in this webinar. Our legislative advocacy program at the PFF is really a major priority for us. We do have some resource limitations on us, but we're trying to be, as effective as we can and as cost effective as we can. And so, really, the day-to-day work of the foundation as it relates to legislative advocacy is really a portion of my time. And as Kate mentioned, my first job out of college too many years ago to really think too much about was working for a member of Congress, and I then spent a lot of time engaged in legislative advocacy after that, in particular around medical research. And then we also get a portion of Kate's time, but Kate also has a whole nother set of responsibilities, as I think many of you know, in the programs area, and does a fantastic job for us there as well. But I really want to thank Kate. She's really stepped into the legislative advocacy role over the last 3 years. I really enjoy working with her. She's learned all this really, really fast. It's been, kind of amazing. So we're continuing, to build on our advocacy program. It's been a process. This last year was interesting, to say the least. But we took a big step this year in hiring Erik and his colleagues at Cornerstone Government Affairs, and you're going to hear from him a little bit later. And it's a very important program because, as you're going to see, advocacy can really have a major impact. Our advocates have been very engaged in 2020 despite all the challenges. Our PF advocates receive advocacy alerts from us about various issues where there needs to be action taken, and they advocate for the PF community, for patients and caregivers. You can sign up at pulmonaryfibrosis.org/ advocacy to become an advocate. And we're really interested in continuing to build our army of advocates, because it's going to make us more effective, more successful in really pursuing the interests of PF patients in the public policy arena. So we had a success well, several successes in 2020, but one of them was a Hill Day. We'd actually held a Hill Day before at the PFF, but I think it was prior to my time, so it had been a little while. But we had one this past March, and we had the COVID curveball hit us, and so we had to shift really at the last minute to a virtual Hill Day. But nevertheless, we still had 25 meetings, calls, virtual meetings, whatever you want to call them, which is a good showing. And I think those 25 virtual meetings were with very important legislators in terms of our agenda, which we're going to get into a little bit later. Our advocates really did a fantastic job of discussing what pulmonary fibrosis is. A lot of people on the Hill don't even know what pulmonary fibrosis is, which is true of the general public as well. And also they talked to these offices about the importance of pulmonary fibrosis research, in particular at the National Institutes of Health, but also at the Department of Defense, which we're going to talk about. So looking ahead to this next year, as it relates to Hill Day, it is going to be virtual for obvious reasons. So we're in the planning stages of that. It's likely to be sometime in the second half of March, but we haven't landed on a day yet. Still working on that. The good news is, by making this virtual, we're going to be able to include more participants. We'll have fewer expense and logistical restraints on us. So we're looking forward to being able to include, more advocates in our Hill Day this year. So we had another success this year, in addition to a virtual Hill Day. Our advocates were successful in getting so-called report language into the House and Senate, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. But this language that really came as a result of those visits in March, really are an important way to highlight the importance of pulmonary fibrosis research. We've got language in both the House and Senate spending bills that we care about, and as far as we know, it was really the first time that we're aware of that House language was included, or that language is included in the House. So what is report language? I'll give you a quick definition here. I think Erik's going to talk more about this later as well. But each year in the House and in the Senate, spending bills are put together, and a spending bill is put together in each body that relates to NIH funding. And along with the amount of that funding, there's also a report that provides, all kinds of instruction and direction, in this case to the National Institutes of Health. Report language is not legally binding, but it's very important, as I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And it accompanies those funding bills each year, and it's a way for us to, as I say, really highlight the importance of PF research and raise its visibility at the NIH. So why the focus on NIH? Why is NIH so important? Well, it's the largest medical research funding agency in the world, located here in Maryland, not too far from my house, actually. My wife actually has been working at NIH for the last 22 years, so it's been great for me to have a highly trusted mole on campus all these years. But NIH is composed of 27 different institutes and centers. And something a lot of people don't understand about the National Institutes of Health, roughly 80% of its funding is sent out to researchers in universities and medical centers across the country. So it has a campus in Maryland, but the vast majority of the money goes off campus to research institutions around the country, probably many in your communities. At last count, PF related research at the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, which of course is the institute that we care about the most. It funds the most PF related research, about $60 million a year. And my guess is, Kate and I need to update that number. My guess is it's quite a bit higher than that. It's not enough, and that's what our advocacy efforts are all about. By raising the visibility of PF with policymakers, we really want to drive that number up, rapidly. And we discovered recently, for example, that the National Institute on Aging is actually involved to a certain extent with fibrosis-related research. So we're going to be focusing on that a little bit more. And so there are occasionally also these cross-institute efforts as well that could benefit pulmonary fibrosis. Next slide. So the importance of report language is, although it's legally non-binding, the institutes pay attention to this very carefully. In this case, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute sees this language. They recognize that somebody in the Congress or multiple people in the Congress are very interested in pulmonary fibrosis related research. They've gone to the trouble of getting report language into the spending bill for the NIH. In addition to that, based on my experience, each of the institutes also has an advisory council. It's comprised of researchers, experts in fields that are relevant to that particular institute. They get together several times a year. That whole advisory council typically sees all the report language, for a particular institute. So it definitely is very noticed and can move the needle in terms of making something a bigger priority than it would otherwise be. I also wanted to mention, in connection with the report language and the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute funding, something we should be very, very pleased with in the PF community. There's a very large grant that's called the Precisions Grant, $22 million project focused on pulmonary fibrosis. We believe it's one of the largest single grants ever, given out by the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute focused on pulmonary fibrosis. I should add, our friends at the Three Lakes Foundation are also providing significant funding as part of that $22 million. So it's a really nice example of a public-private partnership too, which Congress and those in the NIH really like to see. But it's really focused on the genetics. The PFF patient registry is a centerpiece of this Precisions grant, and in fact, all of the patients in the PFF registry are going to be genotyped, which is a very big deal, and all of that information will be available to the research community when it's completed. So we'll keep everybody posted on the progress of that project. It obviously got slowed down a little bit by COVID, but should be really starting to move forward over the next couple of years. So shifting gears to another, very important issue we know to our community is access to supplemental oxygen through the Medicare program. We know that many people have experienced great frustration in trying to get the right type of oxygen, the right amounts of oxygen, and it's frankly just a totally unacceptable situation. And so that's been a high priority for the PFF. I started hearing about this issue almost the minute I joined the foundation in 2017. Just for frame of reference, Medicare is administered by an agency called the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And so at the beginning of the pandemic earlier this year, our medical team very quickly alerted us that certain in-person certification and recertification visits were still being required for people accessing supplemental oxygen, as well as the need to physically sign for deliveries of oxygen. Now, of course, that was putting people at high risk, especially pulmonary fibrosis patients. So we identified the need for a waiver, and CMS, that the agency that administers Medicare, was granting waivers. So Kate did some really good work in researching and writing a letter to the CMS in March, and we were able to get 8 other groups, advocacy groups from the pulmonary community to join us, and they were the American Association for Respiratory Care, the American Lung Association, the American Thoracic Society, the COPD Foundation, the LAM Foundation, the National Association for the Medical Direction of Respiratory Care, the Pulmonary Hypertension Association, and then Three Lakes Foundation as well. So it was a very strong showing, and this was a great example of advocacy really working. So we identified this issue, we took quick action, and CMS granted that waiver fairly quickly. And so that means, patients can now reduce unnecessary trips to medical centers and physician offices, no need for direct contact with the oxygen delivery people. And this waiver will last through the end of the public health emergency, which is likely to continue for some time now. But I think it's a great example of how we really can make a difference for people, real difference for people, through our advocacy efforts. So we're always asking ourselves too, what else can we be doing, to help patients with access to oxygen? And again, Kate suggested and then wrote this brochure, the Medicare Patients Oxygen Rights Brochure, which just really gives patients and caregivers a sense of what they're really entitled to under the benefit with CMS, and we hope that will be a useful tool for people who are admittedly navigating a system that's very, very difficult right now. But simultaneously, we're working with other groups like Three Lakes Foundation and hopefully others in the pulmonary advocacy community on a more comprehensive approach to this issue. It is a very complex, challenging public policy issue. However, this is really going to require a multi-pronged effort. And we're also up against the fact that the folks at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services don't see a problem with the possible exception of the liquid oxygen situation, but that market has essentially completely collapsed. So they're really just kind of recognizing the obvious. And then so we're in discussions right now, really trying to pull the community together around a comprehensive set of proposals to really address this issue in a more lasting sort of way. So we'll keep everybody posted on that. If we get some momentum, if we get a proposal together and get folks working on it, we're going to need the help of advocates across the country to really make change on this. Next slide. All right, so let me just briefly touch upon our public policy priorities for 2021. Given our limited resources, we do keep our public policy priorities very focused. Our agenda is very focused. We really hone in on issues that are pulmonary fibrosis specific, issues where no other organization is likely to weigh in on behalf of pulmonary fibrosis patients. Having said that, we also do sign on occasionally to larger, broader efforts on issues that could affect our community. So we will be pursuing report language again on pulmonary fibrosis this year, as we did this past year. Erik will talk more about this, but we'll be looking to include it once again in the House and the Senate. This is a way to further enhance the visibility of pulmonary fibrosis at NIH and beyond. And we really want to build on this year's success and momentum, but more from Erik on that later. So the other area of it, another key issue, I should say, on our list of priorities is funding for the congressionally directed medical research programs. I don't think a lot of people realize that there actually is a lot of research being funded for pulmonary fibrosis related research through the Department of Defense. And so it's a critically important program. As you can see, in 2019, PF related research grants received $17.3 million of funding. That's very significant, and we think there's an opportunity to, perhaps even build on that. And so we'll be working on that issue as well. And then, as I just mentioned, access to supplemental oxygen could also be a major issue in 2021. So that kind of rounds out our agenda for next year. I'm going to now turn it over to Erik, and I just want to say we're just so fortunate to be working with him and his colleagues at Cornerstone. Erik and the firm have an excellent reputation in DC. We conducted pretty extensive due diligence and really just heard nothing but praise and respect for him and his colleagues at Cornerstone. They're incredibly responsive to our needs. We've been working with them since last January. And Erik advises us and many other advocacy groups on how to achieve their policy goals in DC. And this is very important. Before joining Cornerstone, he spent 12 years as a staffer on the Senate Appropriations Committee. So he's seen very close up how these bills are put together. And his responsibilities there included overseeing funding for the National Institutes of Health. One other thing I want to mention, and I happen to know what a huge deal this is because I've been in and around NIH advocacy for a long time, know the institution pretty well. He's the only non-NIH employee to ever receive the prestigious Director's Award from the NIH and from Dr. Francis Collins. A very huge deal, and just testament to his work and his ability to work with many people, and his commitment to funding for the NIH. So Erik, thank you for all your help and support of this patient community.
Thank you, Bill. That's a wonderful introduction. And I just want to say on behalf of all of us at Cornerstone, how much we enjoy working with PFF. Bill and Kate are wonderful to work with, and I got to meet some of you virtually during the Hill Day last March. We were very excited by what PFF was able to achieve in 2020, and we're hoping that it's just going to get better and better as the years go on. So I'll start by giving an outlook on 2021 and give some sense of the timeline of the appropriations process, and then when and PFF will likely engage and why we're choosing those moments. So everyone is aware from the outcome of the election, it's going to be a very narrowly divided Congress next year. I mean, in the House, there's still a couple of races that are being contested, but it looks like it'll probably be 222 Democrats to 213 Republicans. That means Democrats will really just have a 4-vote majority in the House. So it's going to be really tight. And a similar situation in the Senate. Of course, we don't know how exactly that's going to turn out because of the two runoff races in Georgia, but it's at a maximum, the division there will be 52 Republicans and 48 Democrats. So it's going to be just super tight for the next Congress. That's going to mean that it's going to be tough to get a lot of bills done. There will be a lot of gridlock. Some of the big controversial bills that might get done otherwise, it's going to be difficult to do that. But one exception, we hope, is when it comes to spending, to the appropriations process. And there we hope that Democrats and Republicans will come together and pass the spending bills. And that's very important for PFF because that's how, for example, NIH gets funded. It's how that program, that CDMRP program that Bill was talking about, gets funded at DOD, and that's where the research gets funded to address PF. Now, as Bill said, mostly we pay attention to NIH funding. That's where most of the funding for PF is going to happen. And fortunately, for the past several years, NIH has been on a great run. As you can see on this slide, things were quite flat at NIH for several years. And then about 5 years ago, we started going on a real nice trend. You can see increases of at least $2 billion for each of the past 5 years. And there's pretty much no other agency in the federal government that is experiencing that kind of growth. That's a testament to the great work that's being done at NIH, and also the bipartisan support for NIH that I'll talk about in a moment. Now you can see that last row there, fiscal year 2021 with the question marks. We don't know how those are going to turn out yet. We'll probably know next week. One of the way the funding works in Congress is on the basis of fiscal year, not calendar year, and the fiscal year starts on October 1 and ends the following September 30th. Well, in an ideal world, Congress would have finished its work by September 30th, and we would have known what the FY21 spending levels are. They are, as they often do, delayed in that process. We hope that next week they will finally finish up the fiscal year 2021 appropriations process, and we'll know the numbers. We're not sure if NIH will get another $2 billion increase, but it'll probably be a pretty good number regardless. If not 2, then maybe close to 2. Next slide, please. So, as Bill said, there are 27 institutes and centers at NIH, and the one that we pay the most attention to is National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, NHLBI, and NIH-LBI, like NIH overall, has had a pretty good run over the past 5 years. You can see they went from almost exactly $3 billion to about $3.6 billion, 21% increase over those 5 years. And so that's, again, been a nice run. Congress does not tell NIH how much specifically to spend on PF or really practically any other disease. And that's why when we advocate to Congress on behalf of PF, we don't say, spend X dollars on PF, because Congress doesn't do that. They don't get into the business of saying spend this much on this disease and that much on that disease, because you can just imagine what a nightmare that would be, hundreds and hundreds of diseases and conditions. Congress is not going to do that. But what we hope is that by increasing funding for NIH-LBI overall, the PF will benefit from that. There's the idea that a rising tide lifts all boats. And so that's why we pay attention to that overall funding for NIH-LBI. Next slide. And we hope that the outlook for NIH next year is good. I alluded earlier to the bipartisan support for NIH. We'll have a president that has been, very committed during his time in Congress to NIH funding. Many people associate him, particularly with cancer research, of course, but he's been a proponent of NIH overall. And then the four folks who I have pictures of there on the bottom, these are the chairs and the so-called ranking members for the subcommittee that is most responsible for NIH funding. There's a particular subcommittee on the appropriation subcommittees. It's called the Labor, Health and Human Services and Education Appropriation Subcommittee. It's actually where I used to be a staffer. And on the Senate side, Roy Blunt is the chairman, and Patty Murray is the top Democrat on that subcommittee. On the House side, it's Rosa DeLauro and Tom Cole. All four of those are huge champions of NIH. And again, there's not a lot of programs in the federal government where there's that kind of consensus. So we're hopeful that the support for NIH will continue in the years ahead. Next slide. So let's talk about the timeline for, and I think this is helpful, as you're looking ahead to next year, when to expect decisions, when to engage. So in a perfect world, things really kind of start off with first Monday in February when the president proposes a budget. That's his recommendations. Here's what I'd like to see in terms of spending for NIH and DoD and transportation and so forth. Now, that kind of kicks things off, but they, as I say it in Washington, the president proposes and Congress disposes. Congress has the power of the purse. And so Congress ultimately will decide the spending levels. So in early March and April, the NIH director will come to the Hill, and other agency folks will come, and they'll talk about why they think that there should be certain funding levels. And then the Congress will really start drafting up its versions. And they have these things called markups, and that's where they the subcommittees are responsible for the different spending pots of money. They'll do their versions, and so the House will write its version of the labor HHS spending bill, and the Senate will write its version of the labor HHS spending bill. And that's kind of happening. That whole process is happening in July and September, ideally, and then it all would culminate by the end of the fiscal year, September 30th. The House and Senate would work out their differences, and they'd each pass identical versions of the bill, and the president would sign that bill into law. That's what we'd love to see. Next slide. But of course, next year, like most years, are not perfect, and things will probably slip. The president's budget will probably come a little late. That's because a couple of reasons. One, we're finishing the previous year's process so late, like I said, next week as opposed to September. And also, anytime there's a new president, things just get a little slower. You always give the new administration, it always takes them a little time to get up and running. And will they finish by September 30th? There's always a lot of hand wringing. In the late summer, they usually don't finish by September 30th. So they pass what's called a continuing resolution. That's what we're in right now. And that's basically where Congress funds the government to keep operating at its current level so the government doesn't shut down. And then we hope that sometime before end of calendar year 2021, Congress will finally pass the spending bills. So that's, that's kind of a big picture of what Congress will do in the appropriations process, but then how do we fit into that? So next slide. So even though some of these things are going to be delayed, that still does not necessarily change when we go in and make our asks. In March, even with the president's budget being late, even with some other things being delayed, March is pretty much the season to do that. Remember last year we did it, I think it was March 10th, and the date, it was still working out the date for this year, but we'll probably do it again in March. And that is where that's our moment. It's when a lot of groups do it. Is March is kind of the season. If it's in person, it gets super crowded on Capitol Hill. Everybody's marching from one office to the other. This year we're going to be doing it by phone calls and by Zooms, just like last year. But this is our moment to make our appropriations asks, and so we will have two main ones when it comes to funding. Well, three, I guess you could say. One will ask for NIH funding overall to be as strong as possible, and all the groups kind of get together on that when they figure out what is their big NIH ask. Are we going to ask for $2 billion more next year, $2.5 billion? There's a process that goes on between now and then. There'll be some consensus will be reached on that. But then, of course, what we really want to focus on is the issues that are specific to PFF, because if we don't ask for those, nobody's going to ask for them. So this is where we will ask for our report language that'll go into NHLBI. It hasn't, and we'll spend the next couple of months drafting that, and trying to be as we'll try to come up with some language that will help urge NIH to do more on PF, but kind of advance the cause. We want every year we want to build on the previous year's language and make it stronger and stronger. And then the other item that we'll ask about is, as Bill mentioned, making sure that PF stays a part of that congressionally directed medical research program. So that's March. That'll be that big Hill Day. What I want to actually spend about a moment talking about next is actually before March, and I'm sure Kate will be talking about this a little bit later also. We would like your help on another ask. And many of you have probably followed this. Is there going to be more relief coming in terms of COVID? Either stimulating the economy, helping people who are really hurting right now. Congress is debating that right now. I mean, as we speak, negotiations are going on about whether to extend unemployment and so forth. Well, one of the another big concern, in addition to all those other very, very pressing concerns, is that funding for NIH has really been hit hard this year because of COVID. There have been a lot of research that might have been done in this year had to be put on hold. I mean, clinical trials had to be in some cases stalled. People couldn't get into their labs to do the research. So we expect that in January or February, there's going to be a big push for another COVID relief package that will help deal with some of these problems, help stimulate the economy. And that's when we expect that the entire NIH community, including PFF, will weigh in and try to urge Congress, hey, don't forget NIH. Next slide. And one of the things that we'll ask for is like emergency funding for NIH. And here's what Francis Collins said this year when he was testifying before Congress. you can see his quote where he was asked about the impact of COVID-19 on NIH research, and he was estimating that there's in the neighborhood of $10 billion of NIH-funded research that has kind of been lost in a sense. I mean, they had to keep paying people, but they couldn't do the work that they wanted to do, that we wanted them to do. So that, looking ahead, I would say that's another area, not necessarily specific to PF, but where we will want to engage and try to get Congress to weigh in. We hope that PF will get a slice of that 10 billion, but this is a good way also for us to participate in the whole NIH community to try to press for that money. I'll stop there and turn it back over to Bill and Kate, but I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end.
Well, thank you so much, Erik, and thank you, Bill. Both of your presentations really gave a lot of good information for us to understand where we're going to be at in the following year. So I appreciate all that you shared with us. Go back to this slide deck. No. So I apologize. I think I didn't actually introduce myself at the beginning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kate Gates. I am the Senior Director of Programs for the PFF, and I work closely with Bill on our government affairs projects as well. So I want to talk just briefly, I want to leave some time for questions at the end, but about how can you engage with advocacy through the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation. Many of you have already done this first step, which is to sign up for alerts, but I know some of you probably haven't, so I want to do a quick demonstration of how you do that. It's very easy. So you go about halfway down on the PFF's webpage at pulmonaryfibrosis.org/advocacy, that same webpage that we've been referencing throughout this whole presentation. And you just put in your information. You put in here, mine is actually autofilling because I've done this before. I want to point out that you have two different options here. You can choose to receive emails about the campaign or text messages about the campaign. And when it says about the campaign, but it's actually all of our advocacy updates will go to people who are on this list. So if you're on this list, you got an alert that we're going to be having this webinar. As Erik referenced, one of the most important things that we're going to be doing at the start of 2021 is an action day to ask Congress to provide that supplemental funding for the National Institutes of Health that's so important so that they can make up for a lot of the lost time and lost research because of the coronavirus. We also have other resources on this page. Up higher, there's a video that features PFF advocate Cindy Chandler. She gives you an overview of how she got involved with advocacy and how you can get involved with advocacy. A lot of tips for actually reaching out to your members of Congress, having a conversation with them, who should you be reaching out to. So this video is a great resource. We also have resources, again on the handout section of this webinar. If you click down on that handout section, you can see 10 steps to planning a visit, 10 steps to becoming involved in advocacy, and a PFF quick facts sheet, which will give you a quick overview of what is pulmonary fibrosis, how many people are living with pulmonary fibrosis, the type of information that if you're going to a visit or if you're following up from a visit, sending emails, which is what you're more likely to be doing these days, you can show that quick facts document, and it will be really helpful for members of Congress who, again, who almost certainly know less than you do about pulmonary fibrosis. That'll be a great way to give them a quick introduction to pulmonary fibrosis. Another great thing that we have on this website, and I will go back so that you can see what it looks like. It looks like this. It's a form to actually find your members of Congress. So I know before I got involved with government advocacy, I moved around a lot. I didn't always necessarily know like who my representative was. And it's something that's important if you're going to be involved. You want to start to get to know who it is that you're going to be reaching out to. The people who are most interested in hearing from us are the people we can vote for. So your own state senators, your own member of the House of Representatives are the people that are going to be most interested in hearing from you, and you want to learn about them, what's important to them, what are their key issues, what committees are they on. Erik mentioned before that there's some leadership of these important committees for us, so you want to start familiarizing yourself with what type of issues and committees that your members of Congress are on. So if you fill out this form, then it'll look like this on the website. It'll show you all of your members of Congress here that represent you at the federal level. And you can find their Twitter, you can click on their website. So for example, Richard Durbin is a senator from Illinois, and on his website, I can find things like his committee assignments, issues that he's interested in, and his voting records on there. So this is a really great way just to start to get some information about the people who are representing you. We will have the applications for Hill Day 2021 opening up soon. We're really excited that we'll be able to invite many more people than we have in the past. We've been limited in the past because of travel and hotels, and then actually, coordinating the visits on the ground. So one of the opportunities that has opened up this year is that if we're having these visits by phone, we can have way more people attend. So we're going to have just a brief application just to make sure that we know why people are interested in what they're hoping to get from Hill Day. But please do be looking out for that. Sign up for alerts so that you find out about the Hill Day, and then do that next step of starting to look into your members of Congress so that you'll know who you're going to be talking to. You'll probably talk to a member of their office. What are their issues? What are things that they have been involved with, so that when you join us for Hill Day, you'll be able to sort of have some information around that. So the application should be opening here in the next few weeks or so, maybe in the next month, and then we should have the Hill Day in March. So that information on the dates for the application, as well as the dates for the date, I should say, for the Hill Day will be coming soon. We will have a training ahead of the Hill Day, so don't worry if you're like, I've never talked to a member of Congress before or a member of their staff. We'll have a training beforehand, and we usually pair people up so that you're not just on a phone call by yourself. You usually will be paired up with someone else, hopefully from a area that's near to yours, so that you can have someone else who can help to sort of talk about pulmonary fibrosis and talk about these different asks that we're going to be having you make. So we have some great questions that have come in. Thank you to everyone who's submitted a question. The first question was an easy one for you, Bill. You had mentioned that there was another institute at the NIH that's doing pulmonary fibrosis research that we just found out about. Can you tell us again the name of that institute, just so that we know where that is?
Sure, it's the National Institute on Aging, and my understanding is they're involved in a research project that involves a couple of other institutes, probably NHLBI, around fibrosis. Obviously, pulmonary fibrosis to a certain extent is a disease of aging, so that's the reason for their interest in it. But it was good to find out about that.
Yeah, absolutely, that makes sense. And it's it's good to know that there are different, sort of being looked at from different perspectives and different angles if it's at the different institutes. So that's great. So we have another question that's a hard question that we get a lot, and I know especially I was just on the call before this listening to an update from our Nurse and Allied Health Network about how many patients are struggling. They need high flow and they need something portable, and there just aren't great options. So Bill, can you talk at all about what we're doing and what else is going on in the space related to that question?
Yeah, so totally understand the issue. Liquid oxygen really was a great solution for that situation, right? It can maintain high flow, and it was portable. unfortunately, because of reimbursement changes for the oxygen benefit at CMS that were instituted 10 to 15 years ago, the access to liquid oxygen has really plummeted. CMS's own data indicates that the number of beneficiaries receiving liquid oxygen has gone from something like 80,000 a number of years ago to less than 10,000. So that is one of the issues that we've really been working on or trying to work on with some of the other groups in Washington, some of the other advocacy groups in the pulmonary space. I think the other way that that is being tackled at the moment is through research and development. So, for example, Three Lakes Foundation just recently conducted and funded a research challenge. And part of the focus of that challenge, one of the items was oxygen technology. So they got received some very interesting proposals around this very issue of trying to address high flow capability coupled with portability. So I think we're trying to address those on both those tacks. I think it's possible as part of a solution to the Medicare problem on oxygen that maybe liquid oxygen could be broken away from the general benefit, because it is a little bit more expensive. You have to have hazmat trucks to deliver it and so forth. So there may be a way to carve that out and have that treated separately. So we're looking at that as well.
Great, thank you. Erik, we have a question from someone who's wondering, should they be engaging with senators and representatives before March to prepare them for what's coming up? And maybe you can make this a more general statement about what are we also going to do for follow-up right after we'll have the meeting, but then do we need to do follow-up afterwards? I think are the sort of a related question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we'll have when we go in. First of all, there will be that time in January, February, we'll be asking for the COVID emergency relief. So that'll be one opportunity to engage with your with the offices, and then we'll go in March. I think you don't need to tell them ahead of time, hey, we're going to after talking to them in January, February, March, you can make the ask then. You don't have to tell them we're going to make the ask and then make the ask. But you hit on a good point, which is ideally you want to develop relationships in the office where they know you are the pulmonary fibrosis expert. And if they have a question on pulmonary fibrosis, they're going to come to you. That's one of the nice things about having multiple touches during the year. I mean, let's say their office has a question about oxygen issues, okay? You've met them, you've told your story a little bit, then they know that they can reach out to you. There may, and all I did was talk about the appropriations related asks, but when we come to some of those CMS related asks, there'll be times when you want to reach out to those offices again. And so, those will come down the pike as we develop exactly what our asks are. I mean, generally speaking, you want to touch base with an office when you have something to tell them, which is you have the ask. But there are also opportunities, and we can talk about this during the training, where in the interest of kind of developing the relationship with the office, with the staffer, with the member, there might also be times when you want to touch base with them. And let's say there's a big development in PF or something involved in oxygen reimbursement or what have you. it's perfectly fine to ping the staffer that you develop a relationship with, or the member, if that's the case, and say, hey, just wanted you to know about such and such that's happened. You don't want to be a nuisance. They're getting a ton of emails all the time. You want to be selective about it, but you've touched on a good thing, which is that ideally we're not talking to them just once a year, and we're not talking to them every week, but somewhere in the middle there where you have something meaningful to say, yeah, let's have a relationship with them.
Yep, that's I think that's a great point, and something where we want to make sure we're building that, helping grassroots, or all the people who are actually on the ground talking with members of Congress to do that. So that's great.
Yeah, Kate, before we run out of time, can I address a COVID issue? Because I know I've gotten questions about COVID and PF even before this webinar, so it may be on a lot of people's minds, and I kind of wanted to address two issues related to that. First is I've gotten the question over the last couple of months several times about the impact of, or the possible benefits of all this focus on COVID and enhanced spending on COVID research and so forth, because obviously a big part of COVID is the lung. And my experiences, and I'm interested in Erik's thoughts on this too, but anytime there's been a large infusion of NIH funding and other research dollars into a particular area like the lung, I think I can't be real specific here, but I think it's safe to say that there are likely to be beneficial effects of that on the study of pulmonary fibrosis as a lung disease. So that was one issue I wanted to talk about. And then the second is, I know there have been a lot of news reports about COVID patients, particularly very seriously ill COVID patients, developing fibrosis. And that is in fact happening. It's very serious. A lot of those patients, unfortunately, according to our medical team, are having very lasting, effects from it. It is a little bit different in a sense from pulmonary fibrosis as we understand it, in that the COVID-related fibrosis is not progressive in nature. Again, still very serious. These are very sick patients, but it's different. And so our medical team feels those patients, do probably have a separate set of needs, in comparison to, pulmonary fibrosis patients as we understand it. I don't know if that's very clear, but I wanted to try to address that. And it doesn't mean we're going to ignore, COVID-related fibrosis patients. If people reach out to us for help, we're gonna try to help them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Bill, because I know that's been a common question that has come up, and there's still, I think the good news too is that they're still researching, they're still trying to find out what are the after effects of COVID, what does that mean? So hopefully that'll have some benefit for the pulmonary fibrosis community. We're at time, actually. Thank you all for all the great questions. We didn't get to all the questions, but we'll follow up with those of you who asked questions so that we can get to you some answers. And thank you so much to Erik and Bill for all of your time. This was a great presentation, and we really appreciate you being here.
Great. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Erik.
Bye, everyone.